My name is Tim Fedak, and I'm the Curator of Geology with the Nova Scotia Museum. My recent research has been looking backwards, 200 years, to examine how the people and institutions have contributed to the history and culture of geology here in Nova Scotia. This 200-year timeline includes the Geological Society of America, which formed in 1888, from earlier groups dating back to 1840. Nova Scotia geology has also been influenced by other international groups, like the Geological Society of London and the Geologists Association. By consulting previous histories and with new primary document research, I've created a historical timeline and mapped with black labels the people and institutions from Nova Scotia that have made significant contributions to science and geology, each label length correlating to amount of active time. I've also mapped contributions of New England geologists and cultural events shown in blue, the UK-based geologists and other international events shown in yellow, and the work of the Geological Survey of Canada in green. My goal today is to summarize 4 stages in this timeline, providing an overview of how the study of geology has been impacted by New England geologists, with initial interest in mineral collecting and the early relationships with geotourism in Nova Scotia. From 1820 to 1840, New England geologists played an important role in the start of modern geology in Nova Scotia. Parker Cleveland was a popular professor of geology and natural history at Boyden College in Brunswick, Maine. In 1816, Cleveland published the Elementary Treatise on Mineralogy and Geology, a textbook widely used by students in New England during the time. Cleveland only mentioned the important gypsum deposits in Nova Scotia, but in the second edition of his textbook in 1822, Cleveland noted chalcedony, agate, in Nova Scotia at Partridge Island near Parsboro in columnar greenstone, and cited that he received the information from Thayer. Solomon Thayer had been a student of Cleveland's at Boyden. Thayer went on to establish a historic lead mine in Lubec, Maine. I've recently found 9 letters from Solomon Thayer to Parker Cleveland in the Boyden College archives. I've transcribed the letters and confirmed that these are how Thayer described the location of mineral sites in Nova Scotia, and he focused on sites in the Minas Basin of the Bay of Fundy. In a few moments after landing at Parsboro, he found jasper, amethyst, chalcedony, and agate. The following year, he describes the occurrence of a large amethyst geode, over 200 pounds, but that the hammer of ignorance had sullied its honor before he had knowledge of it. With the help of Dr. Emily Peterman, chair of Boyden College Geology Department, I've also been able to confirm that some of these early mineral specimens remain in their collection. These specimens and the letters from Thayer to Cleveland represent the earliest description of mineral collecting sites in Nova Scotia. Following the second edition of Cleveland's textbook, Charles Jackson and Francis Algier made important steps in the study of Nova Scotia geology. Jackson was studying medicine at Harvard College in Boston, and he visited Nova Scotia in 1827 and 1829 during his summer vacations with his friend Francis Algier. Together, the two published Mineralogy and Geology of Nova Scotia. Jackson Algier's publications included the earliest published geological map of Nova Scotia. Their work, occurring during the Age of Sail, focused extensively on the coastal exposures of the shores of the Bay of Fundy, and particularly within the Minas Basin. Windsor, located in the lower corner of the Minas Basin, was a dominant shipping port between New England states and Nova Scotia. Partridge Island was also an important stop along this marine waterway and is also marked on the map opposite Cape Blomidon. Jackson and Algier's publication also included scenic depictions of the geological landscape, such as this color lithograph of a ship sailing past the southern side of Cape Split, with the area of Partridge Island shown in the far shore. The printing of colored geological map and colored lithographs of the landscape was very innovative for 1833 and immediately made an impression on New England geologists. Only 2 years after the final publication of Jackson Algier's work, an excursion of over 20 students and faculty from Williams College traveled to Nova Scotia in 1835. The trip was described in detail by Professor Hopkins and published in The Monthly Traveler. The details of their trip, the first education field excursion in North America, has been described in detail by Falcon Lang in Atlantic Geology in 2009. Traveling by ship from Boston, the group stopped in Lubec, site of Thayer's lead mine, and on to St. John and into the Minas Basin. While in Windsor, a selection of students and faculty traveled to Halifax for the weekend, and their presence was mentioned in the Halifax-based newspaper the same weekend the group was in the city, and it includes an early geotourism comment on the status of Nova Scotia roads. So during this time, we have the first minerals collected and sites described in the literature. The earliest geological map of Nova Scotia was published, which inspired the first geological excursion and start of geotourism in 1835. The next phase is critically important for Nova Scotia, but is only briefly mentioned here due to time. Nova Scotians were increasingly involved in geology studies. The Nova Scotia Museum was established in 1868, following several successful displays at the international exhibitions of London, Dublin, and Paris. Henry Howe had moved to Nova Scotia in 1854 and played an important role in the study and description of Nova Scotia minerals, including howlite, that's named in his honor. A third phase, an example from the age of rail, involves the International Geological Congress that held a week-long field trip to Nova Scotia in 1913. In preparation for the IGC, several New England geologists worked with members of the Geological Survey of Canada to study physiography and carboniferous sites in Nova Scotia. Charles Schuchert at Yale was one of those who collaborated with the Geological Survey of Canada, and he also attended the Atlantic field trip. His handwritten notebooks from Yale archives include historic photographs, some that he took and some that were provided by the Geological Survey of Canada. Unfortunately, all of this international attention on Nova Scotia was sidetracked by the start of the First World War, and would not be until the end of the World War II that geology activity in Nova Scotia would pick up again. However, Schuchert included several photographs of Nova Scotia geology sites in a new textbook of geology that he co-wrote in 1929. One of these photographs was of Cape Blominen, an example of a wave-cut terrace. Originally a photograph from the Geological Survey of Canada, it was then used in a textbook and seen by most undergraduate students during the time. This photograph was also used as a popular tourist postcard from 1910 until 1945, often with the tagline, Land of Evangeline. So again, we see the linkages between science, education, and tourism for Nova Scotia during the war years. After the Second World War, we see New England geologists and publications again playing an important role in raising the profile of Nova Scotia geology. The Provincial Museum has also taken on a science focus and has hired the first specialist curator of geology. But in August of 1957, the National Geographic published a large article called The Giant Tides of Fundy, written by Paul Zoll, the senior science editor at the time. The article was basically a family travelogue around Nova Scotia. Traveling by car, the family explores the Bay of Fundy shoreline, observing the world's highest tides. It learns about Acadian and other cultural history. The article also features Eldon George, a young mineral collector from Parsboro, and this attention led Eldon's Parsboro Rock and Mineral Shop to become an important tourism focal point for decades. Many of the institutions that formed shortly after the publication of the National Geographic article remain active today and contribute to the culture of geology in Nova Scotia. Eldon spent 60 years as a citizen scientist, supporting geology studies and promoting regional tourism. Eldon was also an advocate for Indigenous Mi'kmaq culture. The History of Nova Scotia Geology timeline provides an opportunity to consider significant events for Mi'kmaq culture in relation to geology. Much of this information has been provided to me by Gerald Glode from the Mi'kma'we DeBert Center. Abraham Gesner, a Nova Scotia-born geologist and inventor of kerosene, was a strong advocate of the Mi'kmaq, and it is in his publication of 1849 that we find the earliest depiction of a Mi'kmaq person in geology literature. New England ethnologists and travel writers played an important role in the early documentation of the language and stories in Nova Scotia. At the end of the Second World War, an archaeology discovery was made at the Debert airfield near the tip of the Minas Basin, which was followed by a museum excavation in the 1960s and discovery of 13,000-year-old agate artifacts. These are the oldest directly dated artifacts in North America. Following the National Geographic article, Mineral and Gem magazines promoted Nova Scotia mineral sites like Parsbro, as well as Mi'kmaq legends related to these sites. More recent work of the Mi'kmaq Debert Cultural Center and subsequent work with the local community has recently established the new Cliffs of Fundy UNESCO Global Geopark. While I've been talking about the 200-year timeline, it's helpful to put this into context for the age of the Mi'kmaq artifacts. It is through geology and archaeology methods that we understand the age of these artifacts. The modern glacial paleogeographic studies have also demonstrated the Minas Basin during this time was land, it was not marine, and ice remnants still remained in the highlands to the north. The Cliffs of Fundy UNESCO Global Geopark has been launched to attract new visitors and link the region's geology to tourism activities and culture, and provides another international audience for promotion of Mi'kmaq culture. For over 200 years, Nova Scotia geology has inspired science, education, and tourism. New England geologists and visitors have played an important role in the development of Nova Scotia geology. The timeline provides a framework for telling some of these interesting and diverse historical stories. I remain interested in speaking with anyone who has interest or information about the history of geology in Nova Scotia, and I'd also encourage you to learn more about Mi'kmaq culture and geology by looking up the showcase video featuring Gerald Glode. Thank you for including me in this session of the GSA Connects 2020 conference.